understandable. So the equivalent in the petroleum industry, but people in America, so that's one. Two is people in the Niger Delta, so we're talking about an area of tribalism and dictatorship. And then three, Iraq, we're talking about a war zone. Okay, so in a proper system, insofar as trade and property rights are being genuinely respected, oil is beneficial for all involved. So let's say I'm thinking of being a worker at an oil refinery. It's my responsibility to assess the risks of that. Every job has certain risks. So you have to decide, are the payoffs for these risks worth it? And the company over time has made both refining and coal mining safer and safer, but still it carries increased risks in certain ways than, say, working at a desk job does. That's just a fact. But that's part of a free society. There are always risks, there are always rewards, you have to weigh them. And so if someone is there and he gets a disease, I'm sorry this particular person got the disease, but that's part of life. It's the same thing. I chose to be a writer, and therefore, if I get the most exotic disease in the world, Bill Gates is going to be able to afford to cure his case, but I'm not going to be able to afford mine. I knew that risk when I decided on this career, and I willingly accept it. So the person who's involved in that part of the supply chain is benefiting. He's getting paid a salary for doing the work that he wants to do and assuming risks he's willing to assume. That's one category. Now, if we're talking about the Niger Delta and other places, what we get into is places where individual and property rights aren't respected. So what should happen in an area is that there should be a respect for property rights, and thus if a foreign company wants to come in and develop on it, he needs to buy the land from the owners of the property, who would then have the choice to consent or not. And if they consented, they would be getting a value. If not, nothing would happen to them. Now, unfortunately, in general, the pattern of development around the world has been that the main controllers of these properties have not been individuals, because these countries or areas don't respect individual rights, but they have been dictators. And therefore, the dictators tend to run roughshod over the rights of individuals and run them off their land and exploit them in all kinds of ways and make it impossible for them to get a job. But the primary villain there is the systems of government in these countries. Now, that doesn't mean that no oil company has ever done anything wrong. Saying oil is a value doesn't mean everyone associated with it is great any more than it means, food is great. That doesn't mean that I endorse, every farmer in the world, or that some farmers aren't evil or aren't murderers or aren't wife beaters or haven't exploited anyone. But in the sense of oil as such, an oil industry is a value. So that more or less takes care of. So the question is if it's being pursued in a system of individual rights and voluntary trade, it's an unmitigated good. If it is not, there's a potential for major abuse and harm to occur, and that's often what happens. So in the case of Iraq, that gets in. That's a similar pattern, but in that case, you have the question really there is this a militarily necessary objective for the United States? And if it is, if our survival if our individual rights being protected depends on going to Iraq and eliminating a certain enemy and defeating it, then we should do whatever we can, and whatever that means for oil wells, that's fine. The problem with Iraq is that we had no clear objective and no clear idea of how we would accomplish that objective, and therefore we're in Afghanistan and Iraq with no clear plan for anything. And if you want an alternative view, there's a new book called Winning the Unwinnable War. Winning the Unwinnable War, and I am one of the contributors to it. I wrote 2 chapters where I give my whole view on who is the enemy and how do we defeat it. So I could recapitulate some of that, but for now that's enough. Yes?
I'll try to take the political out of it a little bit. I'm wearing this, REI jacket here. It's very comfortable. And I drove here. I used to work for Chevron. I'm a former oil employee, actually. And I still consult with the oil industry in a lot of different places around the globe. So I've seen a lot of things. Interesting things, of course. You travel these places, you see neat things. And I love to read about it. It's an interesting topic. This has been a very interesting talk from a viewpoint that I don't usually hear. So I always appreciate getting different viewpoints. First thing is, I think you said 1 billion barrels per day.
Gallons.
I'm sorry, 1 billion gallons per day. If you do the math on that, you get about 238,000 barrels per day. Total world production is about 85 million
It's in the
barrels.
United States.
Yeah, that's it. The total world oil production today is about 85 million think by your calculation, you end up with 238 million barrels per day
Uh,
production. Is that right?
I don't think so, but I don't have a math
I'll
contest
check
right
the
now. I
math.
mean, you can look it up, but it's a lot, and
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. I guess what I'm getting at here is there's a
no, but I just did the calculation. I'm right.
there's a lot of oil out there, and it has a lot of value. And you described it very well. I mean, I'm wearing some of the value.
Okay, so what's the question?
The question here is that we're using so much of it as a transportation fuel. Say 85% in this country is a transportation fuel. We're using this resource that took millions and millions, hundreds
Yeah,
of millions of years, to develop, and we're oxidizing it so I can carry my sorry butt from St. Paul over here to this talk, or to any
thank
talk
you.
I'm going to, or to work. You know, I sure enjoyed having easy transportation. That's great. But I'm doing something. I'm oxidizing something and putting it into the atmosphere that has such value. I mean, you described
So
probably
what's the
about
question?
30. It seems.
Are we wasting it? Is that the question?
Well, my little calculation here is that I did on the calculator is if we start running out, and we will run out. I mean, it's finite, as you said. Say I'm conservative with the number and go beyond what the IEA says is the date. Say I go to 2100.
Go ahead.
If I divide, I'll give it 80 years.
Okay.
If I divide that by 0.15, I can extend the life of the resource by about 500 years if I don't use it to carry myself around. I mean, based on what you said, there's all these incredible products. I mean, artificial hearts. It makes a lot of sense not to use it for transportation fuel. That seems like a complete waste.
So I
mean,
don't,
is that something you
got it.
agree with,
So
or
there's a
disagree?
moral and an economic component here. I think the moral is more important in terms of living for. Actually, I'll address the moral second. So you're giving me this 80-year timetable. So let's hypothesize. Given oil, oil can be relatively cheap for 80 years of demand, including increasing demand for the next 80 years. Now, of course, I don't know what you expect. I don't know if you think that's going to be the last drop, or you think it's just going to go up in price. It's just going to spike in price. Okay.
Probably.
But so this is where the point about resources is really important. That oil is the point of this talk is not that you should be attached to petroleum. That we human beings should be attached to petroleum for the next million years. The point is that petroleum and oil is an essential value to our lives and our economy today and for decades to come. But the freer we are with regard to other resources and other technologies, the more quickly substitutes will be found. And there are basically two patterns of the price system is how this works. As soon as you get a scarcity of oil, as soon as you get any kind of scarcity of oil and prices rise, right? So supply falls relative to demand, prices go up. That gives an incentive both to find more oil, or if that's figured to be physically impossible, to find substitutes. And in that case, what happens is the easiest substitutes get found first. So we would both probably agree that it will be easier to substitute other forms of transportation energy for oil than it is to substitute oil used in petroleum products. Now, you could, because the timetable on that is just longer, it's harder. There are a lot more obstacles getting in the way of it. But that's something that is handled by, I'm going to talk about the moral angle in a second, but economically, that prioritization is already done by the market. So you would see percentage-wise more and more oil go into petroleum products. And then you would see more other materials, whether it's coal-based, natural gas-based, nuclear-based, electricity, go into transportation. But you don't derive from that today we should be using less oil for transportation because tomorrow we might need to. Because I don't know when tomorrow will come, but the point is today, the maximum value for my life is in using oil for this form of transportation and for the foreseeable future. And that's and I need to think about now, and I need to think about the future. So as soon as it doesn't become the best, or it appears not to become the best, I will then look to migrate to other forms. Hold on one second. To other forms of technology. But that's the pattern. But I do not believe that there's any reason in the world why I should be remotely